Hey everybody, Playtendoguy here, and I'm back with another video. It's mid-October and Halloween season is in full swing and the nights are drawing in quite early, so what better time is it to sit down and play some fantastic horror video games that are perfect for the time of year. So yeah, today I'm going to be giving you my list of about 15 fantastic horror-like games to play over the Halloween season. Before I start, this is my list and my list alone, so obviously if your favourite don't make the list, tell me in the comment section down below and tell me why you like it. There will be a few honourable mentions as well, I'll just give them a quick shout out, but primarily these will be 15 titles that I have played and really enjoyed and I think are really quite good horror titles. So without further ado, let's get into it. Right, before I start, I'm going to give you a few honourable mentions. First up is Dead Space. One of the most beloved games of the PS3 and 360 generation, visceral game, space horror game, Dead Space wowed gamers back in 2008 with its bleak, scary and gory experience, introducing the world to the character of Isaac Clarke and the horrible monstrosities of the necromorphs. Whilst the sequel was just as good, the third entry certainly lacked something and then the series faded away. At least we're getting a remake of the first game coming in the future, and hopefully the future will be brighter for this series. Honourable mention number 2 goes to Eternal Darkness. Nintendo games and horror aren't normally something that go together, but one of the GameCube's earliest titles and one of the console's most fondly remembered games is Eternal Darkness. It's a unique horror game that takes inspiration from horror games at the time, but has a cool spin on it with its sanity effects which attempt to scare the player, from characters suddenly dying to the game glitching out. It's an incredible experience, and it's a shame Nintendo hasn't gone back to this, as this would be prime for a Switch remake. Honourable mention number 3 goes to Doom 3. The Doom franchise is easily one of the biggest and best first-person shooters around, from the original games in the 90s to the brilliant reboot and Eternal from last year. But easily one of the most overlooked games in the series is Doom 3. A big departure from the other games, Doom 3 feels very much like a survival horror game at heart, as it's such an atmospheric game with some incredibly looking and eerie vistas and some horrific creatures as well. Even though the game is quite a few years old, it still looks absolutely fantastic. Playing it on the Switch is a brilliant experience, and it's currently only about £8 on the eShop and the PS Store, and is well worth picking up as it's constantly on sale. Final honourable mention goes to Little Nightmares 1 and 2. Probably the most shortest games on the list, Little Nightmares and its sequel are fantastic and creepy puzzle platformers that tell the story through its brilliant environmental storytelling. The game just oozes so much style and tension, going through these gloriously eerie environments with many grotesque creatures such as the Maul hunting you down in many of the game's levels. Both games are short experiences and you can play both of them back to back. The sequel expands a lot on the original, adding the original protagonist Six as an NPC co-op character. The game's probably one of the more slower paced titles on the list, but are well worth playing and a great and unique experience. First up in my list, in no particular order, we have The Evil Within 2. Easily one of the most underrated games on the list, the sequel to 2014's The Evil Within. This entry took everything that made the original great and upped the ante, feeling very much like the recent Resident Evil remakes. Gone is the cinematic borders of the original and dodgy frame rate, and in comes an expansive, lengthy and terrifying action horror game. Feeling like a great mix of the old school Resident Evil games and modern action titles that we've seen refined in the recent Resident Evil remakes. Evil Within 2's biggest surprise is its mini open world that allows you to explore in between story missions. It's not huge and feels rather more like a hub than anything else, but it's just so much fun exploring and seeing what horrors and secrets are out there. Sebastian has a great range of skills and hordes of upgrades. The game is just a thrill ride from beginning to end with an engaging story and some grotesque creatures. It's a perfect Halloween horror and super cheap to boot. Here's hoping we get that third game in the future sometime. Next up, we have Days Gone. The PlayStation 4 is home to many brilliant exclusives, but easily one of the titles that go under the radar for some is Days Gone. After being in development for quite a long while at Ben Studios, it finally saw the release in 2019, and at the time it was met with very mixed reviews. But once players played it, the game is quite now highly regarded, with a lot of people defending it. The game is set in a post-zombie apocalypse setting and follows an outlaw biker called Deacon St. John as he and his friend tries to survive this dangerous world, as well as he's also trying to find his lost wife. It's a very grounded story and is actually really quite good. The gameplay is fun, driving around the open world on a motorbike is a blast and feels great to control, but the game's biggest selling point is the many different zombie hordes that appear in the game. In some sections of the game there is up to 400 zombies on the screen at once, and it's an incredible experience. The game is very much a big open world game in a typical Ubisoft style with loads of repetitive tasks, but the gameplay is a lot of fun, riding around on a motorcycle and shooting loads of zombies. Yes, the game does kinda outstay its welcome by lasting well over 50 hours, but in short bursts it's a fun, over-the-top action title, and fighting zombie hordes is easily one of the most thrilling things to do in gaming. Continuing on, we have another classic, and that is The Last of Us Remastered. Highly regarded as one of the greatest and emotional games of all time, The Last of Us was a complete 180 from Uncharted developers Naughty Dog. It delivered a narratively rich game with an incredibly written characters that, whilst not good people, you do root for them. Its world building is superb with derelict buildings, and it really shows how the world has changed over the years. Its opening is easily one of the greatest of all time and still gets me every time I play it. Its gameplay is great, seeing you survive and exploring this finely crafted environments. It's hard to think that this was a PS3 game. The combat is brutal and thrilling, featuring many tense encounters from human enemies and the terrifying clickers. The Last of Us still stands up after all these years, and whilst the sequel may split opinions, I think it's just as brilliant, and it's a game that does take risks, and it's a cinematic and visual masterpiece. Perfect game for Halloween night, and that is Until Dawn. Easily one of the biggest sleeper hits of the last decade, Until Dawn was originally planned as a first-person game, but the game went under many different changes during development and finally saw release in 2015. And it was a fantastic love letter to old school slasher films of the 80s. It follows a group of young kids as they try to survive the night at Blackwood Mountain after they return there after a tragedy a year before. The gameplay plays very similar to a Quantic Dream game like Heavy Rain or Beyond Two Souls. You control various characters throughout the game and they can live or die depending on your actions. The much brilliant butterfly effect sees performing the slightest action or dialogue choice. It actually has a ripple effect throughout the game and affects how things pan out and which characters live or die. It's a huge ode to slasher films. There's plenty of tension in the game and relationship issues throughout. It also has a star-studded cast with Freddie Mercury himself, yes, Rami Malek also starring. It's a fantastic time and is highly replayable with many different endings, and with the ability to have all characters live or die, it allows for some great experimentation. Developers Supermassive Games have continued this legacy with its spiritual sequel set of anthology games called the Dark Pictures Anthology series, which is a series of short 2-hour horror tales. They're alright, but they failed to capture the magic this game had. Two entries in this franchise, and the first one is Resident Evil 2 Remake. Rumoured for years, but nothing to show. But when Resident Evil 2 finally arrived from the shadows with its incredible E3 trailer, you knew old school Resident Evil was back. And when Resident Evil 2 Remake launched in 2019, it was a perfect modernisation of the classic PS1 game. That was a huge love letter to fans and a thrilling and scary game. Exploring the police station is a terrifying time, with all the zombies haunting the halls, featuring a great mix of puzzles and over-the-shoulder combat. It's just a perfect mix of the two gameplay styles. It also brings back the Tyrant, aka Mr. X, in glorious fashion, as he stalks you relentlessly throughout the game, including both Claire's and Leon's campaign and a multitude of extra modes and stuff to do. Resident Evil 2 Remake is arguably the greatest remake and Resident Evil game of all time. Next up is the latest in the franchise, Resident Evil Village. From one Resident Evil game to another, this one is the most recent title and is also based on the first-person gameplay style that was introduced in Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, and it just expands on everything that title did in almost every way. While 7 was a great grounded title, it lacked enemy variety, but with Village, we see the story move to Europe and see protagonist Ethan Winters living a calm life after the events of the previous game, until he's pulled back into this world of horrors after his daughter is kidnapped. He explores this mysterious village that is having a serious werewolf and mutated creature problem. The village feels very much like a semi-open world here, as you can explore buildings and find secrets. The game feels a bit more combat heavy than 7, which I didn't mind, as the shooting feels much more tighter here, and the game also features an absolutely terrifying creature that, if you don't get it spoiled for you, will scare you witless. There is an argument to be had here that the game feels kind of like a boss rush mode once you get part way into it, but it's an incredible thrill ride that is a great expansion over 7, and I can't wait to see how Capcom continues the series with the eventual Resident Evil 9. Continuing on, we have Dying Light. One of the best trailers of all time has to be Dead Island. It was an incredibly tense and thrilling and quite bleak trailer, but unfortunately the final game was nowhere near as what that trailer originally planned it out to be. But developer Techland took the inspiration from that series and brought out Dying Light, a much more darker and grittier time, and feels much more like what the original Dead Island should have been, featuring a huge open world full of secrets and zombies to slay, but Dying Light adds a few more mechanics to make it feel fresh. The biggest addition is the parkour ability. Your character runs at fast speed, climbs up buildings and jump over huge gaps. It feels like it's been ripped straight out of Mirror's Edge, and movement feels so fluid and a blast to play. Also, there's the nighttime mechanic, which turns normal docile zombies into super powered ones, and there's these huge creatures that also come out at night and chase after you. It turns from a relatively fun and leisurely game to quite a tense, edge of your seat time at night. Over the years, the game has received a huge amount of free and paid content and just launched on Switch, but with a sequel coming out early next year, it's a perfect time to jump into the world of Dying Light. Next up is easily one of the best licensed video games of all time, and that's Alien Isolation. Games based on the beloved Alien franchise have certainly been a mixed bag, and the gut punch that was Colonial Marines disappointed so many gamers. Thankfully, the next console Alien game delivered a much better experience. Isolation is a first-person horror title that sees you playing as Amanda Ripley, daughter of the legendary Ellen Ripley. It follows Amanda as she searches for her mother. It's a slow, tense and uneasy experience that sees you exploring space stations whilst avoiding the various threats on board. But the biggest threat is the xenomorph itself. Its single xenomorph is a clever bugger, and it will constantly stalk you throughout your playthrough. You'll hear it screeching in the distance or its footsteps, and the dread it causes is immeasurable. Hiding in cupboards will be a thing that you'll constantly do, as the game is a much more stealth-based title, though later on you will be able to defend yourself. Developers' Creative Assembly should be applauded for its incredible art design that is a perfect recreation of the 70s film. It's an incredible game, and it's such a shame that we never did get a sequel. We have a very underrated Wii U game, and that is Zombie U. The Wii U certainly lacked a lot of third-party support, but one of its best games was this launch title from Ubisoft, originally starting life as a Raving Rabbids spin-off of all things called Killer Freaks from Outer Space. It soon changed to this zombie survival game set in London. The game sees you playing as a random survivor of this zombie apocalypse. You're told by this mysterious guy called the Prepper, who tells you that this event has been foretold many years ago, even referencing old royal advisor John Dee. The game sees you going through many iconic London landmarks on the hunt for items for the Prepper, whilst also defeating many different zombies along the way. But unlike many zombie games at the time, resources in this are really scarce, and even one zombie on its own is dangerous enough. A cool touch is that if your character dies, they'll turn into a zombie, and to get all your stuff back, you play as a new random stooge who must go back and defeat that previous character to get all the items back. It's repetitive a bit, as how you defeat the enemies 90% of the time is with a cricket bat, but what we do have here is a unique, incredibly tense and suspenseful horror title that is very much a hidden gem. Even though it was on the Wii U and used the system's gamepad in many clever ways, it did actually find its way onto the PS4 and Xbox One a few years ago and is regularly on sale, really cheap. It did scrap all the dual screen stuff, but it was still an enjoyable time. However, I really do wish Ubisoft release it on Switch sometime in the future. Next title, whilst it is for kids, it's a fun game nevertheless, and that is Luigi's Mansion 3. Now time for the opposite end of the spectrum when it comes to horror games, but this one's still a perfect game for Halloween. Heck, this game launched on Halloween back in 2019. Luigi's Mansion 3 is such a delightful and fun adventure puzzle game that sees Luigi going through many different hotel floors, each with their own unique designs and gimmicks. The game isn't scary at all, but it's just so much fun and chock-a-block full of charm. Feeling like a playable Pixar film at times, the game looks that good. For me, this is the best of the Luigi Mansion series, offering a great variety in its level design and creative boss battles, as well as that usual Nintendo charm. There's even a fun online multiplayer mode to play once the credits have rolled. Easily one of the best Switch exclusive and a proper Halloween treat for young and old. It's something a little bit naughty, but still a very good modern horror game, and that is Catherine. Now time for something completely different. Catherine isn't really a horror game per se, especially when it comes to the gameplay, but its tale is so disturbing and horrific, I really do class it as a modern horror. The game follows a bloke called Vincent, whose longtime girlfriend Catherine wants to get married and have stability in their life. But Vincent has cold feet, and this doesn't help when a young blonde Catherine with a C comes in his life, and they spend the night together. And the guilt of cheating and the temptation of Catherine plays heavily on Vincent's mind, causing him to have nightmares where he has to solve puzzles to escape and wake up alive. As suspiciously many men are found dead in suspicious circumstances, are the two things related? Well, you'll have to play to find out. The game's story is fantastic and weaves a perfectly told tale that tackles a subject that isn't normally told in games, which also feels like a rather creative modern horror. The gameplay is a block sliding puzzler that sees Vincent moving blocks to try and escape. It's odd, but it works really well, and whilst it does get difficult later on, it is a blast to play. There is an update version called Full Body that adds another character called Rin, new story beats and extra content, but rest assured whichever version you play, you'll be treated to a deliciously devilish modern horror. We have the cult classic phenomenon that is Deadly Premonition, or Deadly Premonition Origins as it is on Switch. Easily the most critically pulverizing game on the list, Deadly Premonition is a fantastic fever dream of the game that feels like an ode to David Lynch's beloved TV series Twin Peaks. Deadly Premonition follows the detective Francis York Morgan as he investigates the murder of a young woman in the rural town of Greenvale. The town is certainly an interesting place with a whole cast of likeable and unique characters. It's a very surreal story that constantly goes out there with many different supernatural elements, offbeat humour and even movie references. The gameplay is a fun mix of open world investigation and talking to characters. In some sections the game takes a more action focus with shooting these supernatural beings, and whilst it's an odd mix of gameplay, it sort of works. The game is full of jank from odd technical issues to awkward controls. It's really a bit of a mess, but the game is just so charming and unique one-off experience that it makes it a joy to play. There is a sequel on Switch, but unfortunately it fails to capture that lightning in the bottle that this game had. Next up, we have a very unknown Wii title that is called Project 02, also known as Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly in other territories. Now time for another Japanese horror series, but this one's rather less known. It's also known as Fatal Frame, but over here in Europe it's known simply as Project Zero, so please excuse me calling it that. But Project 02, specifically the Wii version, is a remake of Crimson Butterfly. It's a superb, suspenseful, supernatural horror game rich in Japanese beauty. The game follows two young sisters as they get entangled with a dangerous spirit who wants to use the sisters to complete a sacred ritual. Its gameplay gameplay is great, and its biggest and most unique mechanic is the camera obscura, which is what you use to defeat all the ghostly horrors in the game. You have to take photographs of these beings, and the more precise the photo, the bigger the damage. It's a very tense getting into combat, and there's light puzzles as well. The game stands up very well to this day, and whilst it may be a bit hard to get hold of, a remaster of the latest game in the franchise, Maiden of Blackwater, is coming out very soon, so that would be a great shout out for people who want to get into this series. And next up, we have Silent Hill Shattered Memories. This horror series hasn't been seen for years, and this is one of the final entries in the series. Shattered Memories is a loose retelling of the classic original, featuring the same main quest of Harry Mason trying to find his daughter in the mysterious town of Silent Hill. The game is set in a new universe and features new characters, altered characters, and new story beats. The majority of the gameplay sees Harry exploring the town and escaping the horrors of some very thrilling chase sequences. When facing the creatures of the town, it's quite refreshing to see that you don't actually have any weapons at your disposal, which makes you feel very vulnerable. But easily the best thing about the title is the therapy sessions, which see you play a game from a first-person perspective, and you're asked questions based on your personality. You come back to these sections regularly, and how you answer these questions will affect the later half of the game, seeing new areas, characters' attitudes towards you, and ultimately the ending, of which there's 5 different ones to unlock. The game may be short, but it's highly replayable due to this nature, and also it's a fantastic psychological experience. Finally, with the new movie coming out next month, I thought it was a perfect time to include Ghostbusters the video game that has recently been remastered. That's available on pretty much every single console. Most games based on popular media series are normally pretty rubbish, but Ghostbusters the video game was a great little time. Launching all the way back in 2009, it was available on all consoles at the time, but it eventually got a remaster a couple of years ago for modern consoles. Ghostbusters the video game is essentially the third film we never got, and it follows the team of guys as they employ a new buster to the team. And you go through the many iconic environments of the series and defeat all sorts of ghouls and ghosts along the way, including series favourites like Slimer and the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. It's so gloriously like the film, with the script even being penned by the late Harold Ramis, and with the likeness and voices of all the team, it's just a huge love letter to fans of the film. It's a short experience and can be completed in a couple of sessions, but is well worth playing over the Halloween period. With that, the list is over. What do you think of my list of top horror games to play over this Halloween period? Tell me in the comment section down below what your favourite horror games is. And anyway, thank you ever so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you could like and subscribe, that would be totally awesome. And as always, till next time, bye.